Hey, what's going on, role players? It's the Bard here, and welcome back to the corner. So a while back we were talking about Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and whether or not you really need to have it in your collection. Well, now that all the excitement has finally died down and all the reviews are finally out there, we can have a clearer look at what's going on inside the last two chapters. So with that being said, let's crack on with Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, Do You Really Need It? Part 2. So now it's time to look at Chapter 3, Magical Miscellany. Now we've already had a look at the first two chapters, and the first one got a respectable 4 out of 5, and the second one came in with a middle-of-the-road 2.5 out of 5. So what's in Chapter 3? For most people it will be 21 new spells to start with. However, if you already own something like the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, you'll realise that some of these are actually reprinted. Booming Blade, Green Flame Blade, Lightning Lure and Sword Burst are all in the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. Now some people are arguing that it's because of Adventurers League and they want to make it Adventurers League legal, which is perfectly fine. However, from a purely objective point of view, it doesn't take any additional effort to just rip a few spells and copy and paste them into a new book. There's also 9 additional summoning spells. Now, this isn't an issue in and of itself. However, most of these spells just summon different things. Mechanically, however, they all work in pretty much the same way. Each one calls a particular classification of monster based on its monster type, and the mechanics of it are essentially the same in most cases. Where you use a high level spell slot, you get a more effective summon. This one's a bit difficult for me because on the one hand I like to see the additional benefits given to a summoner class. It helps make them more effective. It's more options for the player as well, so that's always good. But the creativity is still a little bit lacking in the sense that it's still a repeat of the same spell, just summoning a different thing, therefore it justifies a new title. Ultimately, however, they are different than what we're getting in the core rulebooks or the expansions, and to that end, they're still a good inclusion. I just have one tiny minor little gripe, and that's with Summon Undead. If you're summoning or calling, then it must be a conjuration spell. It really can't be a necromancy spell because it doesn't work that way. At least, that's my take on it. But then again, I can't let go of the old ways anyway. But we're not going to go down that rabbit hole today, because if I start talking about necromancy, I'll be here forever. We can do that another time. We also have 3 new spells with Tasha's name in the title. It doesn't really make a difference as to what they do, but the important thing, in my opinion, is that the character is named in those spells, because it helps to add depth and a sense of realism to the adventuring world. When you have characters like Melv, Tasha, Mordenkainen, such named characters can help add depth and realism to the world you're adventuring in. This is a good thing because it provides a sense of realism and a sense of history. However, I really feel that they've missed a trick here, in the sense that if you look at page 138, there's a lovely piece of artwork where Tasha and Mordenkainen are engaged in a game of wizard-based chess. This establishes a pre-existing relationship with other characters within the game world, and as such, you would think that they would perhaps learn from each other in some way or form. There's the potential then for acquired knowledge from other prominent wizards that Tasha has met, but they chose not to include it. Maybe simply for the fact the book is called Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. One could argue the designers didn't want to lose their objectivity when it came to the product. Ultimately what you're getting isn't bad, it's just a little bit lackluster in its application. I mean, I've got a spell compendium for 3.5, and that's wall-to-wall spells. Could they not have taken a little bit of inspiration from that? Bottom line, 21 spells, 4 I'm already familiar with. Not a great start. Although the bit about personalizing spells right at the very end, that is something that's nice. That can help you to unleash your creativity and add a lot more flavor and depth to your character. There are some fun new toys, however, in the magical items section. So there are things like the Arcane Grimoire. That's one I really like. It's essentially a copy of the Rod of the Packkeeper. While it gives you a bonus to your spell save DC and spell attack rolls, what it does do slightly differently is it improves your arcane recovery and how it is applied. By manipulating your arcane recovery ability and giving you an extra level of spell in order to regain slots with, you have more control over the level of spells that you're getting, so it gives you a more personal feel, as well as the fact it's actually tied to a specific character class ability, again, which makes it more personal. It's a very good item, not just in what it does, but in its application and how it was created. I really like the Arcane Grimoire, not just because I'm a wizard at heart, but it seems that they've really thought about the character and how they can apply the magical items effects to the special abilities that you already have. Also, it's nice to see that magical tattoos have come back. Not only are they functional, but they're fairly unique as a magic item, and they help to add a nice aesthetic to your character, giving them that extra bit of personality. There's other fun magical items that are really nice as well. I really like the Crystalline Chronicle. It gives you some additional spells which you can use with charges. That frees up your spell book. You can also study the information within it to replace some of your prepared spells, and you can even use some of the charges to cast without verbal or somatic components, and material components with a value up to 100 gold pieces. This means that you can make more use of expensive material spells which you normally wouldn't use because of their costs. Whilst these magic items are very spellcaster focused, which makes sense because it's a spellcaster's book, there could have been a few more items which would benefit more martial classes. The Guardian Emblem is a nice example of something that could be beneficial to a martial character. It could also be beneficial to a spellcaster who does wear armor, such as an Eldritch Knight, but it would be nice to have something that the other players can really enjoy as well. It's fairly obvious this was intended to be a spellcaster's book, but you have all these additional archetypes for all the classes, as well as the fact the title itself says it's Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. So show me everything, or at least a little bit of everything. There should be more things available in the magical items section for characters who aren't dedicated spellcasters. There's definitely some interesting stuff in this chapter. Some of the spells are a little bit lacking and a little bit repetitive, but it's made up for with the magical items. I like that a lot of these items have a lot of theme to them. So if you're using the Crystalline Chronicle, it's very mind-focused, whether that be making connections through things like telepathy or movement of the mind with things like Tensor's Floating Disc or telekinesis. What's really nice about these items, though, is that they give you a sense of purpose. Things like the Librum of Souls and Flesh, they're great for necromancers, but they give you a little bit more. They bring you closer to your specialized field of study. These items allow you to swap in spells that you're going to be more proficient with because of your arcane tradition, and they give you a little bit extra in the form of some kind of special ability which you can use as well. I really feel like a lot of thought has gone into some of these magical items. Items like the couple that I've just recently mentioned are more than just spell books, but they give you a greater proficiency with what you're specialized in. And I think that is lost in some of the character archetypes, but you gain it back through these specific magical items that suit your purpose well. I think a lot of these items really help save the chapter in the way that they've been applied, and as such, I think this chapter deserves a respectable 3 out of 5. So we get to the end of the book now with the final chapter, Dungeon Master's Tools, and for me, this is where everything just seemed to fall apart. So the first thing they talk about is Session 0. Before making characters or playing the game, the DM and players can run a special session, colloquially called Session 0, to establish expectations. So I had a comment previously about how much of the stuff in this section is simply common sense, and I have to agree with that person. When you're making your characters, you're going to be talking about the things that you want your character to do, and therefore they are your expectations. Whether you're deliberately going out of your way to state what it is you want from the game, or if you're just making simple conversation about what it is you want your character to do, you are expressing your expectations. It didn't really need a whole section telling you what Session 0 is. Furthermore, moving on from that, there's party and character creation, and it goes on about your particular backgrounds, your bonds, your flaws, and how you can bring those into the game. Well, I'm sorry to say that if you're going to be choosing backgrounds for your character, it's because you want them to have some realism. And of course the character's history is probably going to come up at some point during the game. It makes everything more interesting, it adds more potential stories, and it gives a feel of realism to the world around you. The fact that you had to go out of your way to write a section about character and party creation and emphasizing the importance of these traits is really, really sad. I really can't imagine anyone except the most hardcore of min-maxers looking at the backgrounds as a simple tool to give you a few more proficiencies and some extra items, because that's a really sad way to play. And the bonds and the flaws, they're there to add character. I don't need to be told about them a second time. So moving on then, the next thing they want you to look at is the social contract. This is where everything just stung me like a fissure. It's a game. It's supposed to be fun. I don't need a social contract. Who are you to have the temerity to tell me how I should behave in my own game? I see what the implication is. They're trying to protect fragile and sensitive minds. But the simple fact is, again, this is just common sense stuff. I don't need this. I don't need this in my life. I don't need it in my games. I know this sounds really harsh, but I can feel the righteousness in these words as I'm reading them. And I can feel the writer's personal biases creeping in. Whether you're a player, a DM, or a game developer, keep your personal ideologies and politics out of the game. End of. Quickly getting away from all that, we're going to move on to sidekicks. Sidekicks is actually something I really like. I don't think I'd include them so much in a normal sized group, but if you only have a small group, a couple of players and a DM, the sidekicks can really help add a little bit of extra punch where necessary. I also think they're perhaps more useful as slightly more influential or powerful characters. I think they help to bridge a gap between the player characters' classes and the simple commoners that you meet with in the world. The character classes are supposed to be heroic, whereas the commoners are essentially window dressing. But important NPCs that help to tell the story, they need to have some power, some influence, and some proficiency. And I think the sidekicks really help to suit that purpose. If the players meet a particularly skilled craftsperson, give them some levels from the expert sidekick table. If they meet the captain of the guard, give them some levels from the warrior sidekick table. If the NPCs get to use any of the abilities that they have, then the players will understand that their influence is not the be-all and end-all, but at the same time, they're still the heroes of the adventure. I think sidekicks should really help to flesh out characters. I think if you're not careful, you run the risk of turning them into henchmen. Just simply nodwig characters there to carry around the rest of the party's adventuring gear. Used sparingly, however, sidekicks can really help to promote player character growth. If the player characters have a powerful wizard in their group, then the allure is going to attract potential apprentices to that player. The book suggests that you should really only have one sidekick per player at the most, but the way I would consider it is maybe you only want one or two sidekicks per group. I think the sidekicks become a little bit more prominent when they're not as common within the group. The fewer you have, the more time you can put into developing them as characters. Furthermore, they might make some interesting kind of reward to the player characters rather than simply gold or magical items. While some PCs may covet wealth and powerful artifacts, other PCs might consider teaching the next generation of adventurers to be of greater value. Having something you can pour your knowledge into can be incredibly satisfying as you watch the character grow from your own PC's experience. The next section is parlaying with monsters, the idea being that when you meet one, it doesn't have to devolve into a combat scenario. It's good that they're trying to encourage players to approach encounters by using their brain. The implementation is just so poor, however. If you're doing monster research into a particular creature, make an arcane roll for this type of creature, or make a nature roll for that kind of creature. That's so boring. Encourage your players to frequent libraries to learn about magical creatures. If you've got rangers or druids, have them go out into the wild and observe creatures in their natural habitat doing what they do. If your PC wants to learn about fiends and celestials, go consult a cleric at one of the local temples. Not only is this more interesting from the player's point of view, it actually justifies your growth and experience and proficiency improvements as you level up. PCs, NPCs, monsters, they can be as varied as there are grains of sand on the beaches or grains of salt in the ocean. You really can't condense these sort of things down into a few tables for each creature type, with 4 different options within each. This is really just a filler section for DMs who haven't done their homework. And even if you do try to parlay with a monster based on the tables that you have available here, some of these options are plain just not going to work. Okay, adventuring party, group huddle. The fiend wants Bob the barbarian's soul, and I say if we give it to him, we can get around this encounter. All the while, Bob is probably thinking, okay, that's an idea, let's put a pin in it, but let's just see if there's anything else we could do to parlay with this creature. Speaking of filler, both environmental hazards and magical phenomenon are just more tables for DMs who can't be bothered to come up with something creative. There's some fun and interesting ideas in there, but mostly you're probably just going to use it if you're a new DM trying to get to grips with the world, or if you simply find that your players are running into a scenario that you haven't anticipated and you need to quickly add some flavour to that part of the world. A lot of these ideas you can get as inspiration from a load of other different places, such as reading a book, watching a movie, playing a video game. All of these things tend to be included in some way. Maybe you don't notice them, maybe you do, but there's no reason for you to have to keep resorting to tables in lieu of being creative. And the final piece of this book, the puzzles, is just a train wreck. Don't get me wrong, I love a good puzzle, I love a good riddle, but once you've used up all the available puzzles in the back of this book, you really can't use them again with the same players, because they already know the solutions. The worst part is, if you want to use these puzzles and you have a player in your group who already has this book, then you're not going to be able to make use of them, because they've probably already read them and realised that the answers to the puzzles are in the book already. Hopefully, once you're done with the puzzles in this section, you'll have an idea of how to create your own riddles and puzzles and scenarios, and then maybe you can get some value out of it, referring back to these previous ones to give you ideas about how to create new and more interesting effects. That, however, really is just the best case scenario for this section, as it's really just a coin toss as to whether the players have encountered this kind of puzzle before or not. What can I say about this chapter? I really don't like discouraging other people's work, but there is so little that I can really take advantage of in the back of this book. I think the only good thing to come out of this chapter, honestly, was the sidekicks, and only then if you've got the creativity to use them to their full potential. The parlaying with monsters thing was a nice idea, but it was just poorly executed, and everything else is just filler tables. The biggest train wreck, however, was the social contract. Sorry, but you are not the moral authority. Part of playing the game, and indeed part of the human experience, is learning for yourself where boundaries lie, not being dictated to by someone who believes they know better. This chapter had one really good idea, and it had one that could have been good but was very poorly executed. As such, this chapter scores a measly 1.5 out of 5. So once we take the scores, we total everything up, we put it all together, and it comes out at a rather middling 11 out of 20. In fact, that's how I would describe this whole book, middling. So, this begs the final question. Do you need this book in your collection? Well, only a half of the content is actually useful. Only about a quarter of the content is actually useful to everybody. There are things in this book that you can use with your player group only one time, and there are things in here that should be absolutely implicit and just simple common sense, and they didn't need to be written down. So do you need it? The answer is probably no. If you have a very good, solid group of friends, maybe you could all throw in a couple of notes and just have it as a communal book for your group. But I don't really think everyone needs to have it in their collection. I can't really put my finger on it, but it feels like the designers had something else on their mind that took priority over them creating a decent product. So overall, I don't think this turned out as great as I would have liked it to. But I'm not one to just sit here and tell you that I think something is good or bad, at least not without backing up what I've got to say. First of all, I think this book definitely needed some history. Tell me more about the character. Tell me more about the people she interacts with. Tell me about her adventures. I want to know these things, and I'm certain a lot of other people do too. The whole book doesn't have to have every part of the character's life in minute detail, but some important events that explain why she met characters, like the player character options that are presented, or how she came across such magical items, that might add context and perhaps give a little bit more depth to the things that we're experiencing. Perhaps if we had a little bit of story as to, say, Tasha encountering a Flaywind or a necrotic tempest and how she circumvents it and what she discovered from analysing it, it might add some credence to why these things have been put into the book in the first place. How about a stat block for the character? Is she a bit slow on the uptake? Does she not get the joke? Perhaps she's not very charismatic. Maybe she's stronger than she looks. Something to give us an idea about how the character would be played if they were ever encountered. Now, I don't own every book, so I can't say if these characters have been interpreted in this way or not. Maybe they have been in a different module and I've just not seen it. But you would think in a book called Tasha's Guide to Everything, you'd at least include that character. What's the character's personality like? What are her favourite spells to use? Does she have an arcane tradition we're already familiar with? Or does she have something that is as yet unseen? Perhaps that tradition could be a little tease, a little Easter egg, showing what we could have to come in perhaps future supplements. There's lots of things that could have been done with this. A few new monsters wouldn't have gone amiss. You don't get to be a legendary character without encountering something that's a little bit different. Ultimately, however, this book really didn't need a lot extra added to it. Maybe the few little things that I've mentioned would have been nice, but what it really needed was context. It needed to tell us why these things were included in the book in the first place. This is a character that was raised by the mother of witches, has adventured all across Greyhawk, and has actually met some other really famous wizards such as Mordenkainen. This character ruled as the Witch Queen. She changed her name and became a figure of legend, but that's all the book will tell us. As I make my way through this book, I would have liked it to have been more of a journey of discovery. I would have liked to have seen a gradual shift in tone as I make my way through the pages. All of the potential is there, but the end product left us wanting. Well, that's all I've got to say on Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Hopefully you're not too upset by my overly harsh critique. If you like my thoughts herein, please leave a like. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, why not consider doing so? If you've got comments about it, why not put them in the comment section down below? And click the notification bell if you want to hear more updates from the channel. And with all that being said, I will see you guys next time at the gaming table.